Jesus was a human being. He lived in a body. And the Spirit of God was in the body with him. And when Jesus would speak, he was speaking from that, from the Spirit of the Father that was in him. And even though he said, I'm the Son, my Father sent me, the people still called him God because they didn't know who he was. And when he was carrying his cross, remember how heavy the cross was to the human body? And Mary and all the people standing by looking at it, they were crying, they were afraid. When they took him to the cross, they were afraid. And there was one guy that helped them along the way, right? That helped them with the cross because it was so heavy. And so one guy helped them along the way. And the reason that Mary, the mother, and everybody else were crying was because they didn't know who he was. It was, they didn't know that he was dying of the psychological ego death. They didn't know that that's all was going on. They thought Jesus was dying and that was it. And so they were scared and crying and worried. And so even when they saw him on the cross, they were carrying on about it because they didn't know who he was. They didn't know he was a spirit. They didn't know he had a spirit inside. They couldn't see that about him because they could only see the physical person, but they couldn't see beyond the physical person. And that's how we are today. Until we wake up, we can't see the spirit in the person. We only see the physical person. Because if we saw the spirit in the person, whether it's an evil spirit until they're born again of God, right? If we could see the spirit in the person, that's who they are, we would never judge one another. We would never judge one another because we would see that same thing working through us as well. But because we're so blind, we've been so lied to. And Jesus died the ego death. He didn't die the spiritual life death. He rose. Once he died that ego death, he rose. And he went always to the cross. He bared that cross, bared the pain to the cross. And in order for us to live, we got to do the same thing too. You got to bear the cross. You got to bear the fear. You got to bear the embarrassment. That's what it means to carry the cross. I present your body as a living sacrifice unto God. You got to present all that mess unto God. Looking for love, the lack of love, loneliness, thinking of suicide, post-stress, whatever they call it. All that you got to bear. You got to stop doing anything about it, even the fear that you have, because everyone who has anger has fear. You got to, even with the fear, you got to bear the fear, meaning you got to face it. No matter how heavy it is, you got to face it. And if you stay with it and just stay with it and stay with it and don't run, because the world is going to give you an opportunity to bear your cross. They're going to attack you in the same way Satan is attacking you in your imagination. They do it. So when they do it to you, you got to bear it. If you feel anything about it, or happy or sad or afraid, you got to be glad for that, because that's the cross you have to bear, and then you will overcome the world. And that's what Jesus did. That's what it means to bear the cross. When we think of a cross, we think of just this piece of wood that we see in the movies and books and things, and we think that's what the cross is, right? But that's not what it is. It's dying from the ego. In order to live, you must die from the ego. And they didn't recognize Jesus until he came from the cross. I mean, until he rose again. And he said, hey, this is me. I'm alive. They didn't recognize him until he rose from the grave. Isn't that amazing? That's mind-blowing to me. And we've been told something totally different from that. And we've been trying to be like Jesus. We've been trying to find a piece of wood to bear. And been running away from the very thing that we need to face. It's like when I encourage people to go and forgive mama. It's like telling them to cut their heads off. They'd rather chop their heads off than to face mama. And Satan have them thinking, oh, you got to hurt her feelings, or she might get mad, or you might know how to handle it. That's fear. And everyone who have truly gone and forgiven their mother, they overcome that fear of facing her. They're like, wow, it wasn't as hard as I thought. I was shaking my boots. But they get past it. That's how it is when you let the ego die. That's what Jesus did. It is done. It is finished. And now all we have to do is bear our cross of the ego and die from it and everything. There's no death after that. Death is an illusion. The only thing you got to die from is the ego. And you will live forever. Isn't that amazing? Yes. And that's what Jesus did for us. He took care of everything. There are people who are waiting for Jesus to come back. He's already come back. He's in us. There's no more waiting. They're waiting in the, what's the name? The Revelation thing, right? The last book of the Revelation. They're like, oh, I know we win in the end. We've already won, and the end has happened. But they're really waiting for something else. While the whole thing has been done, God is in us, Christ is in us, and the Holy Spirit is there, and He will teach us all things. He will bring all things to our remembrance. We already know this. That's why it makes sense when you hear it. It's not like new news. You just realize you've been brainwashed. Because we already know the truth. The truth is in us. But we, as the young man was saying, the preachers and the teachers and everybody, they're on an ego trip too. So they want to present themselves as smart so that you can rely on them. And they're preventing you from looking inside and knowing for yourself. Knowing the Holy Spirit, knowing that the job is finished. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to want, to need. It's all about getting rid of. It's not about adding to. You got to let it all go. You got to die. You're not your thoughts. You're not your feelings. You're not this fear. You're not lonely. You're not whatever else you think you are. You're not a drug addict. You're none of those things. It's all an illusion, and Christ died from the illusion so that we could do the same thing. Isn't that amazing? When I see these things, I'm thinking, wow, I've been suffering all that time for no reason at all. Zero reason. And if you notice, I remember when I was a kid, I used to speak up to anybody. And the adults didn't like it. They'll tell you to be quiet or shut up. Because their ego couldn't do it. Rather than guide me in the right way of doing it, they tell me to shut up. And they had left me alone, I would have gone through the other mess. We were really, really free. And so I want to make it clear, if somebody hurt your feelings, be glad they hurt your feelings. Because that's ego. If someone can make you feel good, they tell you, I love you. And you feel all like somebody love you. Be glad for that feeling, because that's ego. Because sooner or later you're going to find out they don't love you. If someone tells you that you're wonderful and you get a feeling from it, be glad to see that. Because they're not hurting your feeling, they're hurting the ego. But you have identified with the ego and you think that is you. And you think the feelings that you're feeling are yours. Christ took all that away for us so that you can overcome that. And so all these things that are happening in the imagination and in the emotions and what people try, because the human beings are evil. I don't care what y'all say. And it's gonna get worse. Gonna get worse. It's gonna get worse. But not for you if you overcome the ego. If you go through the ego death. And because we have identified with the ego, it's not an easy death to do. That's why a lot of people walk away from it. Some people hear it intellectually, it sounds good. Some people hear it somewhat and it sounds fine. Some people really get it. Those are the people that stay on that path because they can truly see for themselves that they are dying from this false self. Really, life is fine. But you got to die from the false self. And nobody can give it to you. No human being can give it. You got to go through it. You must die. And that's what Jesus did. He was in a body. He was a spirit in a body, just like we are a body, and the Father's with us. It's not us, but it's the Father that's in us. And once you die from that ego, you forgive and die from that ego, you shall live. Right here in this world and won't be freaking out. And the world will be going mad. And you'll be able to hang out with folks and have fun, but you won't get a sense about you can take it or leave it. Oh, I'm leaving. Okay, bye. And the husband tells the wife, I found another woman down the road, and she have 10 children. I'm gonna marry her. And you guys have 7, right? She just has a few more for somebody else. Oh, okay, bye, husband. See you later. It won't be a thing because you're not trying to get ego fulfillment at all. You sit and eat your food without trying to get ego fulfillment. You drink normally, but the old nature must die. You got to let that old, we need a new nature. You just can't change your mind. You just change your mind, it's just another mind changer. It doesn't change anything. But you got to change nature. You got to overcome the old nature and come to the new nature, the abnormal to the normal, which is the nature of God. And you'll be fine, but you got to stay with it. And don't worry about how long it's going to take. Oh, how long is it going to take? If you didn't live in time, you won't have to worry about how long it's going to take. It's only because you're living in time. You want to live in the present. And believe me, I'm seeing this as I go. I'm not like knowing this in advance. I have made up my mind that I'm not turning around no matter what happens. Because I had lights and things along the way. I've been seeing things along the way, along the road, right? And so the little light make me want more light, make me want more light, and make me want more light. So there, because I want more light, then I'm not turning around. I don't care. And that's what's going to happen to you. You get a little light, you're not going to turn around. A little light means everything. It just makes you want more. And then it becomes fun to just work on it, to stay with it. It becomes less pain because the ego is dying. Amazing, huh? Amazing. Anybody disagree with or don't understand some of that? Who understands it?